Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WorshipCast. I'm Franklin.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Hannah.
The easiest person to get to agree to come on the show. Today we're going to talk about spontaneous worship. So again, we're going to talk about spontaneous worship today, what that is, how to incorporate it, some of that kind of stuff. But first, I want to know, who are you?
Well, you know me very well.
I do.
I am Matt's wife. My name is Hannah.
I did actually have to beg her to come on the show.
But yeah, I'm Matt's wife. I'm a musician and a singer and, worship leader.
She sings at church with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Among other things, really kind of wherever she's needed. You've played guitar with us multiple occasions. And one time you played bass on a whim because we needed someone.
Yeah, I learned 3 chords just to get by about a week before we had to
You learned more than that.
Yeah, she learned more than that. She did.
It's a little bit.
Very talented. So we want to talk about spontaneous worship, and that's something that you have a heart for. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about it. What is spontaneous worship for the viewers at home?
That's an interesting. You can't really.
It's a big question.
Really, just to start out, I'm going to read a verse in Ephesians, Ephesians 5:18 through 19. It says, "Do not be drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart." So to kind of backtrack a little bit, in the psalms and hymns that Paul is talking about, he's referring to those words that have already been written, that have already been put down on paper and are recognizable.
Mm-hmm. Which is what we do on Sunday mornings.
What we do on Sunday mornings. Those spiritual songs that he's referring to is heart songs or the spontaneous song. So y'all don't kill me because I'm not a Hebrew expert, but there are 7 words in the Hebrew language that stand for praise. That spiritual song reference that he's talking about is a tehillah moment. Tehillah is another word for praise in Hebrew. It basically means a moment or a song of praise, adoration, thanksgiving, and it comes bursting out from the heart towards God in the form of song.
And I've seen the word tehillah written out, but in like Hebrew.
Yeah.
And there's not a T in it anyway. It's a little odd looking.
So again, I say there's 7, but there might be more. I'm not a Hebrew expert.
Oh yeah. And so we're talking about words and feelings and emotions, like an outpouring that happens. It can happen with a musician too, with an instrumentalist, but a lot of times it's vocally. Mm-hmm. And so there's some examples that I can think of off the top of my head where it kind of happens in some of the more popular worship music. My Heart Is Yours.
Yeah.
The Passion version that Stanfield was on from one of the 2000s. Yeah. The bridge of that song, they go to the all to Jesus, I surrender all. They go to I surrender all.
Yeah.
And after that, the music dies out for a minute, and there are some very free worship things going on, where they keep it quiet, and there are some emotions and feelings that pour out, and then they pull the song back in.
Yep.
Sometimes it's 3 or 4 minutes. Sometimes, if you're Jesus culture, you're Kim Walker Smith, it's 15 or 20 minutes. And she giggles the whole time.
She did something wonderful, and I think this is, one of the perfect examples of spontaneous worship is in their live version of You Won't Relent. After they sing the bridge, she goes into that, I don't want to talk about you. And that's just... It was so beautiful, especially if you're watching that YouTube video where it's done live, and you can tell it was all just Spirit-led. And that's all spontaneous worship is. It's Spirit-led first and foremost, and it's just you singing praises and adoration and thanksgiving unto God.
And I'll say this about that part of the that live version of You Won't Relent. The whole song is about, you won't relent. and so it's about God, but when she breaks into that part, she's singing directly to God. No one else in the room, not his presence over everybody. It's her and God. So it is a very personal outpouring that happens in that point. Listen to it. Give it a listen when it goes to that. It's a very touching personal moment.
And it speaks directly back into, that tequila moment where, it's her heart outwardly pouring out, praise towards God. Just very beautiful moment.
Oh yeah. And now, there's a lot of different kinds of spontaneous worship, and again, there's the shorter, there's the longer. Some people really enjoy the longer. Some people don't really enjoy the longer. It's a very polarizing kind of thing. What's the difference?
Tough question.
So the difference in the short versus the long, or
well, besides just the time, why do you think some people are more open to the longer, and why do you think some people are not as open to the longer?
What an open question.
I love those.
For the longer, for the sake of spontaneous worship, it does allow for those moments, for the music just to be able to breathe, as I call it, and just to give you time, to focus on, what you're singing on. Now, if you're in a church that's not used to that, and you're used to, 5 songs, 3 minutes each, let's sing a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus and maybe a chorus again and we're done. Stretching it out and allowing for it to breathe and doing that spontaneous can be helpful, but sometimes can be hurtful, depending on the circumstance.
Yep, a lot of it depends on the situation and the congregation and kind of where your congregation is. I don't think it's ever necessarily just a bad thing, but there's times that a 15-minute long, just open-ended kind of thing can be a little bit jarring, especially if you're not used to it. I would say that if you're trying to incorporate this, you're just starting out, don't jump directly to the 15-minute long. Don't start there.
You're not. Nope.
Yeah, we'll get back to that, but I did actually speak to a very prominent worship leader in our area. Her name's Jackie Christofferson. She told me I could use her real name.
Preface, yes.
Yeah, wonderful lady, very spiritual, and she's very much into the spontaneous and prophetic worship at her church, and she's actually going to be hosting some different classes this summer based on that. So if you're in our area and interested in that, definitely look her up. But I kind of asked her, I told her that I was doing this today, and I told her, I said, what would you say about spontaneous worship, just so the listeners can get a little bit more idea of what it actually entails. And she gave a beautiful definition. She said, spontaneous worship to me is an explosion of my worship to God, my expression to Him coming out of the relationship with Him. Another thing I call it is an overflow. I'm so in love with Him, and many times my spirit knows what to sing more than my mind does. So sometimes I just hum melodies. And that's so beautiful, to be so on fire and so passionate and so in love with God that you just can't help but sing. And, that's spontaneous worship.
That's a different kind of in touch with God too. That's the kind that we talk about the connection with God, and if you're on stage and you have an ego, or you have a lot of you in you, that you can't achieve this. Not truthfully, you can fake it, but generally people know, and that's not something that you want to fake. An outpouring back to God, you don't want to have that be
No.
So it's one of those things where in order to truly do this, you've got to be out of your own way, and you've got to have God's best interest at heart. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then kind of to go off of that, I kind of asked her, I said, well, how do you incorporate that in your worship settings? And, she said basically what they do is they usually leave a time to play music and let the song breathe and focus just on Him. And then the new melodies will come. She said also they bring the music down and allow a quiet time to listen to God. Man, oh man, isn't that important? Not just in our times where we're at church and worshiping, but even in our everyday lives. And she even says that, spontaneous worship is caught more than it is taught. And that spontaneous worship in your own prayer life and worship times at home, it will make all the difference when you're worshiping together as a congregation. Very, very powerful stuff.
That's something that happens a lot too, and first off, without music in your own life, I know as humans, we all, I'm very guilty of it. We can fall into a trap where we're always telling God things. We're not listening to what God's got to say, and spending that, those quiet moments, that quiet time. But then musically, you're on stage and you're playing guitar and you're leading. You can forget to listen to what God's doing in those moments, and that's something I've talked about on the show a whole lot. And that you can drown Him out. So I think that's an important aspect of what you're talking about too, is that when you're doing a spontaneous worship kind of thing in your church, that the congregation needs to know that it's not just that yes, you're personally outpouring to God whatever's happening in your spirit at that time, but the people in the congregation need to know that when that happens, it's a quiet time, it's a reflective time, it's a listen to God time. It lets the whole room at once fall into that cushion of, okay, God, speak to us now.
Yeah.
And if you really, listen and open your heart, and you are in a pure state of worship in that time, the Holy Spirit is going to speak to you. It's
something that you said I really liked was when you said in your own personal time too, in your own personal time of worship, when you're spending time with God, you do your own spontaneous worship. You're able to just talk with God, talk to our dad, talk to our Father. And when you start doing that, you can start outpouring it into worship.
Yep.
And to me, I believe that even a congregation should be able to do that.
Yeah.
Just let go. If you're not a musician and you're singing along, just let go. It's okay. But I believe that you have to go from your personal time, your personal worship, and then it leads into a congregational worship where you just let go. It's fine.
Yeah, if you're not used to talking to Him by yourself, you're not going to be used to talking to Him in front of people in a setting like that. It's got to come here in personal first before you get to that other outpouring. 100%.
Definitely. What you do in your private time is gonna overflow into the public, and so. And that's one thing, the heart has to be in the right place. You have to be humble, completely focused on God. You have to allow that Spirit to move. We have to make sure that we're not, just singing extra melodies just to hear ourselves sing or make ourselves look better, or to glorify ourselves. We have to make sure that Spirit is moving and we're doing it for Him and from Him.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that if you're in those situations, if it's true, people will know. The congregation will understand. Again, I talked about it being jarring. Even beginning to do small amounts of spontaneous worship can be jarring, but if it's truthful, it's really from God, it will be a very comforting presence. It really will. But that if you're doing it for yourself, in those moments, there is going to be some flashiness. There's going to be some showiness. There's going to be some things come through from yourself that's not of God, and people will, they'll know. And it's funny, we talk about how sometimes the other congregation doesn't care 100% what your tone sounds like and stuff, just they get something out of it. but they're smarter than you give them credit for.
They are.
Because they're part of the body, and if you're a weak link, everyone knows. You've got to be, if you're going to do this, you've got to make sure you're good here first.
Absolutely. You have to listen to God. I think one thing is, we don't want to put God and the Holy Spirit in a box. I feel like that's easy to do sometimes on Sunday mornings, especially during worship time. We don't allow for those moments where God, where we can just listen and, he can move. And not saying that there's anything wrong with playing those 3-minute songs and, going away from that. But I feel like sometimes it doesn't allow us to fully give our praise back to him sometimes.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about this. How do you incorporate it? What's a good way to start? If you're at home and you're watching this and you're like, if you feel that you need to do that, you think, well, what do? Do I just jump out and do it? No.
I definitely feel that it's something that, you need to know, especially if you're on a worship team or a worship leader, you need to know the parameters that your, elders and leaders and pastors of your church have basically set. If you're a church that doesn't do that, I wouldn't just automatically go run it.
Just blurt it out.
But
here's what we're doing today, everybody.
I feel that. But if you do have those strong convictions and you do feel the Spirit moving and feel that you don't have the ability to move because you are afraid of what the congregation might say or upsetting someone, I do think it's important to talk to your leaders about it and have that biblical discussion with them. Because it might be something that, your church really needs, but it's just hasn't really been something that they thought about.
What do you think about this? What if, and we'll talk about, planning it actually in songs in a minute, but, what if you're actually planning it in a song? Do you think it'll be okay to let the congregation know, hey, we're going to let this one breathe for a minute and really reflect on the words and kind of let them know maybe that it's going to happen?
Yeah. And
something like that.
I'd say, when the Spirit really is moving and, you're going to be as one and the body is going to be in tune with each other. There shouldn't be any awkwardness or anything of that sort, if it really is coming from God and coming from a place, that it's right. Because we all as Christians, we have that natural discernment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we plan it in songs then. It's spontaneous, but it's planned.
Spontaneously planned.
Yeah, absolutely.
There it is.
So basically, you know when it's coming, but you don't know what it's gonna do.
Sometimes there are some where it's like, well, here we go.
Yeah.
I've done that, a few times, but it happened.
No.
But I do feel if you are a church that wants to openly, embrace free worship, prophetic worship, and spontaneous worship, it is important to plan those times out in the services. Maybe do 2 or 3 songs instead of 5 songs, and work with your musicians and let them know, hey, this might happen, just breathe with me, just move with me. And I've read some sites and stuff. People say it's good to come up with like hand signals, but again, if you're working it together as a body, you can all sense the Spirit moving.
Oh yeah. Well, you can also say something like, "Hey, after the bridge, let it breathe a minute," and then everybody kind of knows. Okay, here's a part where we're all going to kind of get out of the way and see what happens.
Because I do believe it's biblical to have order in the church. Paul writes about that. And it's the church is not a place for confusion. So you do have to make sure that you're just not going off in left field unless we're all together going off in left field.
Yes.
Yes, move as a unit, please.
Yes, please move as a unit.
Yeah, because we've been in services where, you can feel it. If I were to do certain things, it just wouldn't have been right. But other places, it was effective and it was right to be able to go off because we were all moving in the same direction.
We've been in places where people come up and say, "Can I have the microphone real quick?" And at that point, you never know what's going to happen. It was very good, and we all went with it. But do you remember that?
I remember that. I do remember that. Yeah.
And if you're watching, we appreciated that. That was really cool.
Yeah.
What about this? Would you say that this is maybe a small form of spontaneous worship? Because Franklin loves to do this. Get to the end of a song and do the chorus.
Oh, yeah.
And then Franklin say, all right, let's do it again, just our voices. Maybe you do it a couple more times. Is that a form of it in a way?
I would say it's like an effect of it. You know, it's spirit led, and you know,
something hits you the right way.
Something hits you. Yeah.
So, I mean, that might be a good place to start too. You know, if you haven't done this yet, maybe start with, all right, everybody, let's do that chorus again, and let's really reflect on it. So start with some of that to get your congregation kind of into the realm. That helps. Before you tell your keyboard player to hold a C and 15 minutes later.
Yep.
Let's talk about this aspect of it. So as a musician, we're playing a song. You know after the bridge that the music's going to die out a little bit. And that everybody's going to that a spontaneous thing's going to happen, that you're going to open the floor to let the Spirit move, and you're going to do what it wants. But as a musician, you can't just play whatever you want in those moments.
No.
What do we do, everybody?
You gotta know your key signatures and your circle of fifths, and
as the keyboard player, really a lot of times when the music drops out, you're the one holding it down.
I'm holding everything. Yeah, I'm typically holding everything.
We just all look at Franklin.
I'm just waiting. I'm holding. I'm like, okay, well, I'm holding the 1 chord, 4 chord, go back to the 1 chord until 1 4 1 4. Really?
Yeah. Hey,
I mean.
But I do think from a musical standpoint that it's important that, you know, in these moments where things are happening, you need to know your number system, your natural number system. You need to know your key signatures, and you need to know your major scales. Yes. So as the chords and everything move, you need to be able to move with them and know what's coming. You also need to be able to play melodies and things off the top of your head, to be able to improvise using scales and stuff.
And that was one thing Jackie also pointed out too, you know, the instrumentalists and the singers really work together. There is that sense of harmony and unity, and a lot of times, you know, something will hit her right, or something will hit one of them right, and, you know, she may sing a melody off of something that someone played, or vice versa. So you really are working as one. To go back to that Tehillah word, you know, to praise and give thanksgiving, and, you know, towards God.
Yeah. And so it's usually vocals, but it can be, you know, that your instrument's what you're using to outpour back to God, and you're playing to Him.
Yeah.
And so one thing you want to make sure that you do is that as a musician, that you're practiced up enough that you don't have to think, okay, major scale, there's these notes. You want to be comfortable enough in it that you can use it to worship instead of having to focus so much on it. So I would say that if this is something as a musician that you want to be able to do, that there's some woodshed practice time to be had to get comfortable enough. And then, you know, this is a future episode that we're going to be doing. Your band, your worship team as a unit needs to be able to play well enough together. So we've got an episode coming up on growing a band together.
Yep, growing a band.
That you guys need to be able to read each other. And there's almost a supernatural kind of, you know.
You just do it. You lock eyes with each other. You're like,
yeah. I mean, sometimes we've had a 7-piece band not plan a stop in a certain point, but everybody does it at the same time anyway. Yes. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that unity in the body, talking to God. When it happens, it's not just the vocalist that's let it happen. The whole group together is a unified outpouring to God, and the congregation knows, and they become part of it too. It really is a very special.
It is
special kind of thing, and until you've done it, you know, you don't really understand it. And I would say this too: if you're watching this and you are a You're not a musician, you're just in the congregation. If you're a little bit on the fence about it, try it. Pray about it, think about it, give it a shot.
Let go.
Yeah, let go. Let go. Let go and let God.
There you go. There's one of those phrases.
Yeah.
And to kind of backpedal a little bit, I did want to read a few verses.
Of the Bible? No.
Of the Bible. We're reading God's holy word.
Here we go.
But yeah, just because I have heard a lot of people, say that because it's spontaneous and it's from the heart and it's not planned, they'll say, well, the heart is wicked. And yeah, in Jeremiah 17 it says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? But if you recall back to the psalmist in Psalm 51:10, he prays, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. So if you are actively seeking that relationship, going back to what Jackie said about the relationship overflowing into song. So if you're actively pursuing that relationship and you're praying for his Holy Spirit to fill you every day, he can make in you a clean heart. But we do have to be careful. Because again, flesh can creep back in so easily. So it is a daily renewal.
Especially in musicians.
Especially musicians.
I don't know why music makes us feel like we are more than human. But we are, for some reason, we are almost more susceptible to that than anyone else.
We are.
So it is a very fine line to walk. And we're not all always perfect by any stretch.
Nope.
Especially Franklin.
No, definitely not me. Definitely not me. No.
All right. So we hope you've learned something from this, or maybe you've decided to try something. Maybe you've decided to be open to something.
And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, definitely let us know. I'd love to talk with y'all a little bit more. This is a subject that's really close to my heart, really personal to me, and I've experienced it on the worship leading side, and then also in the congregation. How powerful and beautiful it really can be. But yeah, just comment away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Please like, comment, subscribe. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. She has the password to everything, so she will also answer your comments.
Back.
Yes.
She forced me to give them to her, and I had no choice. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of the WorshipCast, and we will catch you guys next week.
Bye.